Thanks for tuning in to more NFL Draft Talk on Inside Our Lads NFL Depth Charts as we talk Baltimore Ravens football. That means Tony Lombardi is going to join us from the Russell Street Report. Tony, good to talk Baltimore Ravens football with you again.
Always a pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am glad to have you back. I didn't think we were going to talk again until after the draft, so I look forward to, of course, recapping what will be a busy offseason, as it always is for every team in the NFL, even though the Ravens haven't had the busiest offseason to date. But I wanted to get you on anyway because of the obvious, and that is we're getting close to the draft and everybody's mock drafting and where are the Baltimore Ravens going to pick. And usually, you get all this stuff in the top 10 and that's great for the teams that suffer normally. Not like Miami, but most of them suffer that are in the top 10. But when you look down the line at like where the Ravens are at 27th, correct?
Correct.
That's when it actually gets really hard as far as trying to figure out what's going to happen because you still don't, and teams could still trade. You don't know if a team will trade up from there to get a particular player that they like. But when we talked a few weeks ago, these were some of the notes I wrote down that were going to be key to where the Ravens were going to go with their early picks. Definitely a center. That was a position that they were going to lean on. And very important was going to be what was going to happen with right tackle Orlando Brown. And Orlando Brown's still here. And if Orlando Brown had been traded, I'm not even sure that we'd be having this conversation. But since Orlando Brown has not yet been traded, I definitely wanted to find out more about that. If you think he is going to get traded by the NFL draft weekend, the latest, and if he does get traded, what do the Ravens do at right tackle?
Well, those are two good questions. And I think the first one, I do not think he's going to be traded. I think that if he would have been traded, it would have happened already.
Okay.
I think that there's I won't call it baggage, but there's a little sidebar, if you will, when it comes to Orlando Brown Jr., and that is he wants a big contract. He wants to be paid like a premium left tackle, even though he's only played the position, maybe a handful of games in the NFL. He played it at college, at Oklahoma, but he wants to be paid handsomely. And I think that given the way the cap is this offseason, with it being, depressed a bit,
okay,
next season is going to be a bigger year. I think when you couple those two things together with what the Ravens want, which I'm told is a number one pick for Orlando Brown Jr., otherwise, they'd rather just wait until 2022 and get a comp pick, or 2023 and get a comp pick, as if he leaves as a free agent in 2022. So I think that the value of him as a right tackle this season, because this team is approaching the 2021 season as a season that they can win it all, and they need that right tackle. So unless somebody comes along and offers him a number one, I just think he's going to stay there.
All right, well, why wouldn't a team offer the Ravens a number one for Brown? Do you think Brown...
Well, I think the contract issue is one thing. And the other thing is, do you want to pay a guy to be a left tackle as Brown wants to be? He's been pretty clear that he wants to be a left tackle. If you're going to pay that guy, is the sampling size that he's put on board in the NFL enough to make you dish out the kind of money he thinks he's worth?
True.
So I think that that's the issue here. Okay. If he were to give a team to pay it, if he were to accept a contract that was reasonable and the Ravens wanted a 2, I think the deal would be done. But I think Eric DeCosta is along the lines of he's worth a 1 to me this year. And if I get that, then I'll talk. Because he invited their agent to go out and shop him.
Even more surprising that he still hasn't been traded.
Come back with a number 1. And so I wonder if having Orlando Brown Jr. as a right tackle or left tackle, as he's played both in Baltimore, behind or in front of Lamar Jackson, if Lamar's athleticism makes him look a little better than he is to a team that maybe doesn't have that same sort of quarterback.
Yeah, that is a good point. All right. You also said that you thought that. All right, well, I'll tell you what. Let's just go with Orlando Brown gets traded. The best way for the Ravens then to handle that spot, would that be to definitely go out and try to sign one of these veterans for a 1-year deal, maybe draft a right tackle with their first few picks? Because I know you're not really high on Tyree Phillips sliding into that right tackle role.
No, I'm not at all. I think that Phillips could be a good guard, a good, serviceable guard. I don't think he's ever going to make any Pro Bowls or anything like that, but I think he could be a decent guard. Being a tackle, I just think his footwork he's just slow, and I think that he'll be taken advantage of. Orlando Brown Jr. has a little bit more length. He's used to playing either side, or he's played either side. So I think when you take those things in consideration, who could the Ravens go out and get if they were to get that number 1 pick? I'm thinking it would be a combination of a veteran and a guy that they could pick up in the draft with that number 1 pick that they got in exchange.
Yeah, that's definitely that was my thinking as well. All right, center, I just mentioned before, that is definitely one of their top needs. So out of the centers that you have looked at so far, and I know you also just got a hold of our draft guide. So what do you think about the center that might fit best with the Ravens? If they're thinking either first or second pick?
I think that the center is probably, well, let me back up. I think with the Ravens offensive line, they'll get a player. I don't think they'll spend their first round pick on a player for an interior lineman, because history shows that they've been able to find guys in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. Marshall Yonder, perfect example, a future Hall of Famer in the 3rd round from Iowa. But I think they'll get an interior guy, the best of either a center or a guard. They'll probably look for a guy that has some flexibility, that could maybe play tackle in a pinch in the event of an injury.
Okay.
But I think they'll go with the best interior lineman they could find, because they signed Zeitler away from the Giants.
Huge.
And, he's a nice player. Bradley Bozeman is really highly regarded by the offensive line coaches, and he's a smart player. He's a player that plays tough. He's played center at the University of Alabama at a high level, and there's some talk that he might slide into center, depending upon what they do in the draft. If they find somebody, let's say that 2nd or 3rd round, that's a guard, I think Bozeman plays center. If they find a guy that's a 2nd or 3rd round pick as a center, I think Bozeman will stay at left guard.
Okay. What about Bredesen?
Bredesen, I don't think that he had a really good rookie season. I think that there's a lack of confidence in him. I don't think that he fulfilled the promise coming out of Michigan. And you got to think that the Ravens had pretty good intel, given the Harbaugh brothers, right?
Yeah.
So, but the kid has been described as a guy that loves football, studies the game, is a great kid to have in the locker room, but he just didn't get it done in his first year. But that said, we've seen in the past with the Ravens that some of these guys take a little while. If you think back to the time they took Rick Wagner out of Wisconsin, he really didn't produce much until his 3rd season. And then his 4th season. And then when he was good,
he
hit the market and left.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
So
you'll love that.
Because but it happens. It's the NFL. But these guys develop at different intervals or different paces, and maybe Bredesen's one of those slow bloom or late bloomers.
Well, that you would hope so, especially since both Phillips and Bredesen were drafted in the 3rd and 4th rounds last year.
That's right.
You can't miss on both of those guys, and chances are the Ravens, they have a pretty good staff. They know what they're doing as far as scouting, and they don't usually miss like that. Wide receiver Sami Watkins was the big addition, but he's not the guy that people were talking about at the end of last season. Oh, the Ravens they got to get Lamar Jackson at number 1. That's not Sami Watkins anymore. It's a good addition, but is that then where the Ravens could very well go with their first pick late in the first round?
I kind of hope they do not go that way. And the reason being is the guys that seem to be on the most people's boards at 27 are Bateman and Marshall. And
yeah, I don't think
like
Marshall's
that.
a number one.
I think that those guys are okay with the second round pick.
Yeah, sort of like a Marquise Brown.
Yeah, but not that first round pick. And that's not really who the Ravens are, Greg. I think they're obviously a run first team. They need to improve the passing game, no question about it. But I think that's why everybody says that they need a number one receiver. Well, I think there's other issues in that passing game that need to be fixed before a number one receiver can be the answer or the solution.
Yep.
I think that they need to improve schematically. I think that Lamar needs to improve. And I think they need to improve that offensive line in terms of pass protection.
What's the second? The Ravens have 5 picks, correct? Plus the
compensation
picks. So the 2
Counting
compensation picks.
Yeah, there's 7 picks overall.
Okay. And their top picks, do they have a second?
They do.
Okay. So they have a first and a second, and they've got what? At least 1/3. Do they have 2/3?
No, they only have 1/3. It's a late third.
Late third, okay.
And they don't have a 7th round pick.
Okay.
Do not.
So they did not get. I think when we were talking, there was a possibility they could have got a 3rd compensation for Culley. Did they get anything for him?
They did get that. They get 2 for him. The Minardi hiring as a head coach. They got 1 this year and 1 next year.
Okay.
But they had another comp pick from. Well, it escapes me right now. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And he sat out last year.
Yeah. So, okay. Then, now I don't know where some of these other receivers are going to go. You never know. But I think it's possible that if they pass on taking a receiver, because I agree with you. I think once you get down to that end of the first round, I don't think you're getting that guaranteed number one guy anyway. So it's going to have to be something else. And I do think that they'll add somebody. So I'm looking at guys like maybe Rondell Moore, somebody like that is or Elijah Moore. I think those guys would be perfect for the Ravens because they're fast. You give them the ball in short areas. That's the kind, sort of like a Tyreek Hill type of weapon. And that's something the Ravens can really use if you don't have that legitimate number one.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned Sami Watkins earlier, and Sammy's a nice player. The issue that he has isn't about any physical abilities. It's about his availability. He's hurt a lot, it seems. So, if you can get 16 games out of him, you really have something there. But so you have to think going in, you're going to get 12 games out of Sami. They have to be thinking that because that's what history tells you. So, and I think you look at some of these other guys like Devin Duvernay. Mm-hmm. He showed flashes last year.
Yep.
He's a guy that really runs angry after the catch, and he's pretty fast too. And he seems to have really good hands. So I think that he's going to get a better shot this year. Without Willie Snead around, I think you'll see Duvernay spending more time in the slot, and James Prochet may get a little bit of a look there. So I think if you develop these guys, you have Sami Watkins, I'm pretty sure they're going to draft a wide receiver on, if it's not day 1, it's going to be day 2. Mm-hmm. And then those guys are in the mix. If you improve that passing game, there's, another thing that no one really talks about seemingly is another tight end. They can go after another tight end, not so much in the draft, but there's been a lot of talk about Zach Ertz becoming a Raven because he kind of fits the kind of thing that Greg Roman likes to do with that offense.
That would be smart.
If they had a less expensive way to improve your passing game is probably a good pass catching tight end.
Yeah, because the trade for Josh Oliver, here's a guy that has some talent, but just didn't, I don't know if it was injuries or what it was at Jacksonville, but he gets, it's almost like, okay, it's not a big deal, but I think right there it shows you that they're looking for someone else. And that would make a lot of sense, especially with Lamar Jackson. Because that's what Lamar Jackson feasts off of. He needs those tight ends. He needs those short, intermediate guys. That keeps his accuracy stats up, which is where he works his best in the passing game.
Right. And I think also when we keep talking about wide receivers, I think that tall, angular, wide catch radius kind of receiver is what they need to complement the other guys. Marquise is a smaller guy. He probably would be more effective running the slot a lot of times too. instead of on the edges where he gets beaten up at times.
Yep.
If he's in the slot, chances are he's going to be going up against a slightly smaller corner, which helps him a little bit.
Yes.
So if you get that guy on the edge that can play on the boundaries, I think that complementary kind of receiver helps the other guys. And I think that Bateman and Marshall are those guys. I'm not that excited about either one with the 27th pick.
Yeah, and if they decide maybe, again, to use that second-round pick in that area, maybe a Nico Collins, another Michigan boy.
Yes, that's a nice fit.
Yeah, maybe he fits in there well.
And maybe he's a third-rounder.
Correct. All right. On defense, so now what's the deal here? I'll ask that later. So sticking with the team, what is the big need on defense for the Ravens right now? What would you say is the number one need?
Pass rush. They need a pass rush, and they need to improve it either whether it's from the interior or from the edge. I know they had Justin Houston in earlier this week, and he left without a contract. I'm not surprised by that because if they wait until May 3rd, the first Monday following the draft, if they sign a free agent, it doesn't factor into the compensatory pick equation. So, and those are picks that are treasured by Eric DeCosta. So I would think that if Justin Houston left, they may have offered him a contract, but it's a wink sort of contract so that, hey, Justin, we'll do this on May 3rd if you're still available. So I think they need to improve the edge. And one of the reasons why I would be disappointed with, not that I would be disappointed with either the players, Marshall or Bateman, I just think that 27th pick has a better chance of having more of an impact with an edge guy.
Yes, because if you look at it, the top edge rusher in the draft may not even get taken until outside the top 15.
Right.
Possible.
And all these quarterbacks that are supposedly going to be taken, it really helps the Ravens because it pushes another good player down the board.
Yep. And what about now Patrick Queen didn't have the year that the team was hoping, but he was a rookie. So there's still high expectations that he's going to maybe break through. Is there a position difference? Is there something that he just has to get more experience? Is that the deal with Queen?
I think the deal with Queen, the athleticism's there. We all know that. It's just that I think he needs to put on a little bit more weight, a little bit more muscle mass to take on those blockers and be able to shed those blocks. And I think that he was a young kid. He was only 20 years old when he was drafted. So you take that into consideration, and the fact that they didn't have the OTAs that they've typically had in the past and didn't have a chance of really spending a lot of time in training camp to do what, OTAs are, to me, have always been a building block for training camp. Without that building block, you're kind of on the fly. And these young players, when they have to think too much, that athleticism that we see at the collegiate level isn't there because they're slowing down to think.
Yeah.
Now I think he's had a season under his belt. I think he'll be a much better player in 2021 than he was in 2020.
And what about the secondary? How is the secondary looking right now? Because I know when we talked, there was the real trick is keeping Tavon Young healthy, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, he's a terrific player when he's on the field, but his availability has been really dismal over the last couple of seasons. So the Ravens have to keep that in mind, too. Tavon did take a pay cut, recognizing that he hasn't been very available for the team. So we'll see how he gets out, if he's out there on the field. If they can get him out for 12 games, that's a big boost from what they've had in the past couple of seasons, which I think he's only played maybe 3 or 4 games each of the past 2 seasons. Terrific player when he's on the field. But, they found out through injury last year some other players I thought played pretty decently. Anthony Averett out of Alabama, I thought he played pretty decently when he was forced to play as a starter on the outside. Marlon Humphrey, he gets better by moving to the outside because he's been forced to play slot because of Tavon's injuries. Chuck Clark has come on as a nice leader. You got Desean Elliott, who had his first full season as a starter. Yep. He's returning. Iman Marshall out of USC. He's a kid that they had high expectations for. He's coming off injury, so he'll be available to them. But it would not surprise me if safety is another one of the Ravens' needs this year going into this draft. And if they can get one of those rangy center field kind of players, I think that would bode well for them.
And also someone that could double as a slot nickel corner in case Young isn't healthy, correct?
Right. That's right.
Yeah. So what I was going to ask you is Joe Cullen, who is now the coordinator at Jacksonville. Do you believe that, and this is actually this is outside the Ravens scope, but do you think he's going to end up trying to run the same defense at Jacksonville that he knows about in his experience in Baltimore? I know he brought Ward there, so that made a lot of sense. And I say that because when I look at Jacksonville and I look at Kayvon Chason, another guy that didn't have, a big rookie season, I see a guy that was miscast in a 4-3 that needs to play in a 3-4. Do you see that that's the case? Because sometimes guys that they're in a system for a couple of years and that's just what they're familiar with and that's what they're going to run. Other guys, well, yeah, but they also have experience in other ways. But if a Jacksonville fan was asking you and they wanted your opinion on that, would you say that would be the case, that you would believe that they'll try to run a 3-4 this year in Jacksonville?
Well, let me first say that Joe Cullen's very highly thought of by the Ravens organization, and I know that Wink Martindale and Joe shared a really good relationship. So I would think that where did you grow up? You grew up in Baltimore, so to speak, and you were hired probably to bring that similar philosophy. But I will say this about Wink Martindale. The Ravens, I don't even think they have a base defense. They morph into all kinds of shapes and sizes,
okay,
and it depends upon down and distance and their situational substitutional packages. So I think that with Wink, what Wink does, sometimes you'll see 7 guys on the line of scrimmage. Sometimes you'll see more. Sometimes you'll see 2. So he's all over the place.
All right.
I think Joe Cullen will basically bring to the Jacksonville Jaguars the type of approach that allows him to put his best players in the best positions to succeed.
Yeah, especially early on when you're rebuilding a team franchise like the Jags. You just
right.
you got to do what you have to do early before you can get the players you want.
Right. And to your point about Chason, I think that he's going to make sure that a player like that is going to be in position to extract his innate abilities, which they didn't do last year.
Yeah, and matter of fact, not only was I responsible for the Jags report in the Ourlads Guide, but also Atlanta, and they were able to get Dean Pease, which was a really big deal for them to get a guy of his caliber to come in there to Atlanta, a team that has been used to running a 4-3 as well. So that's going to be interesting, and I think Dante Fowler is going to benefit more than anybody.
Yeah, Dean Pease is an interesting topic in Baltimore.
Oh, yeah? Why is that?
Well, I mean, he's respected, but Dean Pease is one of those guys that just I don't think that on the tail end of guys like Rex Ryan and Chuck Pagano and guys like that just had this Ravens fans really embrace this organized chaos.
Okay.
And Wink has kind of embraced that too.
Okay.
And although if you talk to Ravens defenders when Dean Pease was here in Baltimore, they all respected him immensely. It was on game day and decisions made on the sidelines to all of a sudden get soft, play soft. And that really went against the Baltimore DNA that was created by Rex Ryan initially, that you're always aggressive.
Yeah.
And to play back, it went against the grain of the organizational DNA and even the fan base. And I think that's the reason why fans were glad that he left.
Interesting. Okay. And I'm sure the fans are happy that Tom Martindale didn't get a head coaching job. So
for selfish reasons, yes.
Yeah. and also outside the scope of Baltimore, as a Michigan fan, they've got this 33-year-old defensive coordinator now. So
right.
if a Michigan fan, and Michigan fans, I mean they're especially the young ones, they don't understand the whole Harbaugh thing as much as someone like I do, who actually watched Harbaugh play and what he meant to the university. But I thought it was a great move by Harbaugh to make the changes that he made, especially to go after young blood. What do you think Michigan's getting in their new defensive coordinator?
I think they get men who are coming from a really, really good organization that love football, that understand what it means to help cultivate a culture. And that's one thing that John Harbaugh does. And you learn from the guy at the top of the food chain a lot of times, right? And John Harbaugh has created a culture in Baltimore that makes players want to come to Baltimore, all things being equal. So I think when you learn and you're schooled in that, that becomes part of your coaching DNA, and what you've learned that has been successful, you start to become an ambassador for what you've learned. And I think in that regard, I think they'll be able to build something that'll be sustainable in Michigan with that kind of approach. And as you said, young coaches are probably going to be around for a little bit longer. That helps to build that culture even more.
Yeah, I'm already hearing. I mean, the kids are already talking about how much different it is. Just practice. There's music being played. They're happy to be there. When you get the older guys, sometimes it can get a little bit, stale and maybe too serious. So
the generational gaps start to rear their ugly heads, right?
Exactly. So I think that's even just the one thing I'm hearing out of Michigan camp that I think will bode well for Wolverine fans moving forward. But as far as the Ravens are concerned, before I let you go here, Tony, can you give me a prediction? You've done enough mock drafts yourself. So give me a prediction. You can give me a couple of names, but your number one prediction of who the Ravens will get with their first round pick.
I actually think what they're going to do, Greg, is trade back.
Okay, because they only have a few picks early. So
yeah, it seems to me, and I haven't studied it as much as you have, but it seems to me that there's a bumper crop of good picks between 50 and 100. The Ravens, they have that second round pick. They don't pick, I think, until 104 or 108. That's a big jump.
Yeah.
And I think it's Eric DeCosta's MO to move back and pick up more picks, because he wants to. The more picks you have, the better shot you have of hitting on one.
Sure.
And I think, and you probably, we haven't really talked about this, but I think this draft is going to be weird. I think it's going to be weird because there have been a lot of players that sat out last season.
Yes.
And how do NFL teams put a grade on that? Do they ding those players for that?
Some will.
Right. So how does that change I think draft boards from each of the teams probably looked a lot similar last year than they will this year.
Yeah, good point.
And as a result, I think more picks are better. So my prediction is they do not make a first round pick this year. And they'll trade back, unless they do what they did with Lamar Jackson, is they trade out of the first round. There's a guy on the board that they really like. They trade back into the first round with Tampa, just so they have that 5th-year option in the contract, later on down the road.
Uh-huh.
So,
but quarterback right there, that's because there's a possibility now that, well, we thought months ago that would be the spot for Mac Jones. Somebody might come in and if they want Mac Jones, he could go late first. Now there's talk about him maybe going to the Niners at 3. So now the guy that you're thinking about as a late round, first round pick could be Kellen Mond. So if somebody wants Kellen Mond and he's available, that's a spot where you could see a trade up.
Yeah, he's not afraid to move all over the board on draft day. And he's done it time and time again. Even before Eric DeCosta was the GM, he was the guy on the phone when Ozzie was the GM making those deals, moving up and down the board. And so he's pretty adept at it. I would be more surprised if they make that pick than if they trade back.
And then their first pick, give me a position then.
Edge
rusher.
Defender.
Okay. So they're going to go after a pass rusher with their first pick, whether it's in the first round or the second round. That's your
right. Unless there's one of these guys that falls down the board that they're in love with, that doesn't play either of those positions, because the Ravens have always been big on taking the best player, the highest player on their board, and they'll always go back to the years when they didn't need a tight end, but they took Todd Heap. They didn't need a safety, but they took Ed Reed. So it's worked out for them, and I think it's a philosophy that they'll still embrace on April 29th at 7:30 p.m.
It's never about need for the Baltimore Ravens, that's for sure. But
Right.
yeah, and maybe one of those edge rushers in the first round, whether it's a Rousseau or a Phillips, you never know where those guys are going to slip either.
And Rousseau is one of those guys. He's one of those could slip. What do you have? It 1 year of good stats,
That's it.
and so is
And
that
opted out.
right? So what does that say about the guy?
That's
Because
true.
the Ravens draft players that love football.
Yeah, that's true.
And was that a career move because it was his career, or does he really love football? And those guys know better than I do because they'll be interviewing them. But
not in person.
All those things factor in.
And the not in person interview situation is also going to be, because you want to interview these kids in person, the ones that opted out, but you can't.
Right.
So, all right. Well, we're looking forward to it. We'll talk again after the draft. We'll get an opportunity to wrap it all up. In the meanwhile, for Ravens fans, between now and the draft, where can they go to get Ravens news?
You can check us out at RussellStreetReport.com. You can find us at RussellStReport on Twitter, Ravens 24/7 on Facebook, and Russell Street Report on Instagram and YouTube.
Excellent. And don't forget, everybody out there, I'm going to grab this 20 guide from our lads. So I haven't even been able to get my guide in the mail yet. It should be tomorrow, because they went out a couple of days ago. I think they went out on the 14th. So they're available in the mail now. I have my PDF, so that got me a head start. And
yes, I got it too, and thank you for that.
You got it. And anyway, can't wait. Should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to wrapping up most of the offseason with you at some point after the draft, Tony.
Sounds good, Greg. Thanks for having me.